background about the Community Foundation. So we are an organisation that works to enable money in Hampshire, Portsmouth, Southampton and the Isle of Wight to be directed to local community-based organisations that are meeting the needs of our communities. So we work with companies, we work with statutory sector bodies, we work with high wealth individuals to either put their money into an endowment or to flow it through to ensure that we give grants to the amazing tapestry of voluntary community sector organisation that we have in our communities, meeting a number of the needs. So just looking at what we did in 2022, we gave out grants of about 1.9 million. And about 1.3 million of that were grants to support organisations to reduce the impacts of poverty across our communities. And they can be things like projects that work to improve the life chances, supporting education and employment skills. They can be projects to reduce the likelihood of criminality, as well as projects to support homeless, families living in poverty, support to debt, all of those kind of things. So a number of different grants, 1.3 in 2022, to support and alleviate the impacts of poverty within our communities. And actually, since the launch of this year, so 2023, we've given about 1.75k in, 175k's worth of grants to alleviate poverty across our communities. So I'm just going to read out some stats to you about Hampshire, because I think these are quite shocking and not everybody knows or understands these statistics about our community. So according to Hampshire County Council, 1 in 10 children in Hampshire live in poverty. And on the island and in Southampton, that is estimated to be 1 in 4. That's our communities that we live, that we engage in. And that is quite shocking to think that in, you know, a westernized country like the UK, that we still have that level of child poverty. Since the cost of living crisis has emerged, you know, according to research, around 10% has gone on every kind of household costs. But for prices involved in basic kind of consumables, the Office of National Statistics has estimated that these have risen by 16.5% in the last 12 months. Since November 2022, and this is the highest rise since September 1977. So this is a significant cost burden in our communities to individuals that are already potentially struggling. At the end of the last year, the Office of National Statistics stated that more than half of adults were buying less food as a result of cost pressures. The most vulnerable appeared to be the hardest hit, with 61% of those in the most deprived areas buying less food compared to that of the last year, as opposed to 44% in the least deprived areas. And this month, April 2023, sees household energy prices for the typical household rise by a further 20%. So that's just a little bit of context of the environment and the scene that we're setting today. So I just want to talk about our amazing speakers, and it is a big thank you from us here at Hampshire and Isle of Wight Community Foundation to Rachel, Samantha and Tracey for joining us today and sharing their experiences, their insight. So just to introduce those speakers, we've got Rachel Thompson, who leads Pan Together, a community pantry, cafe and support organisation in the Pan Estate in Newport on the Isle of Wight, one of our most deprived communities. We've got Reverend Tracey Ansell, who leads North End Community Pantry and through North End Baptist Church, and also works with the homeless community in Portsmouth. And then we've got Samantha Mabbott, who leads the Citizens Advice Bureau in Hart, who is experiencing unprecedented demand for debt support and advice, despite being in the least most deprived boroughs across the whole of the country. So an absolute tremendous kind of wealth of talent and experience with us today that they're going to share. So I'm going to hand over to our first guest speaker, who is Rachel. Rachel, do you want to come off mute and tell us a little bit about yourself and what you're seeing through your organisation?
I'm off mute. So my name's Rachel Thompson and I'm the Community Centre Manager at Pan Together. Pan Together is a small island charity which exists to support and provide a community hub for the residents of East Newport, which includes the most disadvantaged area, which is ranked at 5.8% in England's most deprived. In other words, 94% of places in England are more affluent than Pan. And many of our local residents are amongst society's most vulnerable and marginalised, including the shocking 35% of children who are growing up in poverty, and that's against an England average of 17%, so it's nearly double in the community we're supporting. And the interesting thing is that those statistics are all from September 2019, and things have undoubtedly worsened in the wake of the pandemic and the cost of living crisis, which is biting so hard for so many, as Rebecca's just been indicating. We recognise the growing need in autumn 2021, and since then our community support and anti-poverty services have become increasingly essential. Nobody should have to choose between food and fuel and children's clothes. We can't change the world, but we can make a real and tangible difference to people's everyday lives. The need is pressing and urgent, and I'm just going to read you 3 quotes from local mums. The first: "I've never asked for help before, as I find it extremely embarrassing, but I was getting so desperate, I actually thought about stealing food to feed my kids." That's one mum. Another said, "This past 4 days, I've gone through £12 of gas. That's without electric, bills, food, rent, and the ever-growing council tax." The third one: "I just wanted to say thank you for the kind and generous supermarket voucher I received today. Thanks for continuing to support and reassure the least fortunate. I've now been referred to the relevant people to help with my fuel bills to try and get back on top. You amaze me. No questions, no judgment, no pressure, just pure love and support. I can only imagine where I'd be now if I didn't have you to turn to." So it really is serious, stealing food or thinking about stealing food to feed your children. So back in November last year, we opened the Pan Community Larder, where it's open every Tuesday and Friday. Membership's free. People pay £5 and receive 2 carrier bags. And they choose what they'd like for themselves, and it's fresh, frozen, refrigerated, tinned, dried food and other household essentials. And if they choose wisely, they get £20 to £30 worth of provisions. And, you know, demand is growing. In the period from the beginning of January just to the end of February, we had a 183% increase in the number of visitors to the larder. And demand is growing most from working families. Families like Mary and Paul, not their real names, who live 5 minutes away from the centre and have 3 little boys. Mum suffers from mental health issues following postnatal depression and has various health conditions, and dad works full time. Now, he earns £5 too much for that family to qualify for a single benefit, and he's too afraid to ask his employer to reduce his hours in case he loses his job. So it really is tough out there. So far, we've fed over 2,000 mouths in this short period. And I'll just tell you about one family. Let's call her Sarah, who on the first Tuesday we opened the larder, she appeared with her 3-year-old son. He walked through the door and turned around with joy and delight to his mum, saying, "Mummy, mummy, apples, because there was a pile of them on the side. And because we've got to know Sarah over the last few months, she told us that that day, it was a Tuesday, on the Monday, she'd taken her other 2 children to school without being able to feed them. Then she and her little boy had gone home, turned all the electricity off apart from the fridge because they couldn't afford to keep it on. Then the children came home from school, still to nothing. On the Tuesday morning, she went to the job centre to get a referral to the food bank, but unfortunately, that wasn't going to be open until the Wednesday. So in desperation, she went to visit the family liaison officer at the primary school, which is adjacent to our community centre, who said, "You're in luck. The community large will be open at 12 o'clock." And we were able to help her. But it's a kind of, I don't know, thank goodness we were there, but in many cases we shouldn't have to be. And it's a damning indictment on society, actually, that people are living in crisis as they do. 2022 was a really momentous year for Pan Together. In the May, we were visited by the then Earl and Countess of Wessex, Prince Edward and Sophie, to say thank you for all the work we did during the pandemic when we helped people in 5,500 different ways as part of the late Queen's Jubilee celebrations. We were awarded the Queen's Award for Voluntary Service, which is the highest award a voluntary organisation can get in the UK and is the equivalent of an organisational MBE. And then in December of 2022, the then High Sheriff of the Isle of Wight presented us with a High Sheriff's Award for great and valuable services to the community, all of which is really good and really lovely, and we're very, very proud of it. But actually, the thing we're most proud of is doing exactly what we're doing now, which is providing direct and vital support to people, and thereby we're fulfilling our mission of improving the conditions of life for local residents. So that's me briefly. Thank you.
I mean, Rachel, that was just absolutely phenomenal. Your passion and commitment is just exemplary and really comes through everything that you've just said. So, you know, certainly struck a chord with me, and, you know, a massive thank you on behalf of all of our community for everything you and your organisation does. It's so profoundly, clearly needed.
Thank you.
And we're going to hand over now to Samantha from Hart Citizens Advice Bureau. We'll pick questions up after all 3 panellists have spoken, so I will hold all questions until the end. So Samantha, over to you.
Thank you very much, Rebecca, and good evening, everybody. So I'm Sam Mabbott, as you say, from Citizens Advice Hart, and I've been working at Citizens Advice Hart for 2 years, and I have been shocked, I think, by the change in the need of clients over this last couple of years. It's been staggering. At Citizens Advice, I think the cost of living crisis for us is very real indeed. Despite Hart being, as Rebecca mentioned, the most affluent and least deprived area in the country, every day, though, we are seeing the effects of cost of living crisis for our residents. Just to give you some statistics for us, particularly in Hart, for the last quarter, in October to December of 2022, compared to the same period of the previous year, 2021, we've seen a 472% increase in clients seeking charitable support and food banks. So that's crisis support. We've seen 389% increase in clients seeking debt and financial capability matters, and 180% increase in energy related issues. So what we're seeing is pretty stark here in Hart, despite us being an affluent area. I'll give you a few examples of a few of the clients and the situations that we're facing and that clients are facing with us. A client came to us this week. I'm trying to give you examples of cases that have come just recently, just to sort of show that what's happening right now, not what's happened previously. So a client came to us this week in her late 70s. Her husband has recently died and she's on a very low income, and having lost the income from her partner as well. She's renting, which many do in this area, private renting, and finding it difficult to pay that rent. She came in to find out if there's perhaps any benefit she might be able to get. The advisor chatting to her noticed that she was anxious and she was very thin. The client did admit that she couldn't afford to eat and heat her home, so she was choosing between the two and really struggling to know what to do. We couldn't help a lot, but we could give her a supermarket voucher from the Household Support Fund to allow her to go and buy some groceries and buy some of the things she needed. We noticed that after a few days, she hadn't used the voucher, and we contacted her and said, why haven't you used the voucher? She said she was so worried she may have to pay it back. She hadn't used it. This is the situation where we have clients coming to us who feel so humbled and undeserving of help. They've never needed that help before, and they're coming to us now, and they're finding it very difficult to accept that help. So we've got a lot of work to do around educating people to help them to understand that it's okay to ask for help. Another example is a gentleman in his early 60s, working 18 hours in a shop, and he's also on universal credit for a top-up. The landlord suddenly increased his rent and he couldn't afford the rent. His income was less than his outgoings. We asked about food, how was he doing, how was he managing? He said last night he had a jacket potato, but he couldn't put any butter or filling on it because he couldn't afford anything to go on it. We negotiated with his landlord and I managed to get the rent decreased back to what it was, which was an unusual situation, but the landlord was really understanding. The gentleman said he couldn't work more than 18 hours because he felt very depressed and exhausted. We gave him a food bank voucher, and the following day after receiving that, he phoned us in tears and he said thank you. He was so grateful to find 2 bags of food on his doorstep. He couldn't believe it. And I think these are the situations again that they don't expect it. They're not expectant of help and support, and it's even more challenging for us. Another example is a single mother in receipt of benefits. We do have quite a lot of single people in Hart. I've got a large proportion. She's got 2 children, one's disabled. She is getting everything she's entitled to. We did a benefit check. She's getting everything she deserves with benefits, but she's been forced onto a prepayment meter for gas and electricity because she's owing £2,000 on her bills. She says the standard charges for the prepayment meters have gone up from £5 to £15, which is making things much harder. We were able to provide a supermarket voucher for her to go and feed her family, and we could give her that on a weekly basis for 5 weeks. And we also provided an energy grant. And this is the quote we got back from her. Thank you for the vouchers for the supermarket for 5 weeks. This will make a huge impact to our family, especially in the coming weeks when my children return to school. It means I can make sure they have all the uniform they need before returning to school without worrying about the cost of food shopping on top, and how to juggle and worry about the cost. It'll make a huge difference to my little family in a positive way, including a much more positive impact on my mental health. Mental health, as we can all understand, is hugely impacted by debt and stress and worry about paying the bills. Over 50% of our clients have a disability or a long-term health condition, but a third of those are mental health issues. And we're seeing that people with mental health issues are coming in with at least 5 issues. So it's very, very complicated trying to help people, and they're getting really confused and they're really struggling to know where to turn and how to cope. And they come in with their bags of paperwork to do with debt, and we just have to sift through, start from the beginning and start to look at their cases one by one. They are in untenable situations. We're used to maximising income and we're used to helping clients to budget. That's becoming really challenging. We're finding difficulty in reducing outgoings. So the common scenario then is this difficulty with income versus outgoings. National Citizens Advice did actually give an example of Nicole, a single mother with a baby on universal credit, and how she has a large proportion of her income is going on her rent. Rents really do take up a large proportion, at least 70% often of incomes. It doesn't leave very much to pay your council tax, your energy bills, which are rocketing, and also your just your household goods. So finding money actually to pay for the items that you really need, the personal items, the baby items, you're already in a negative budget. So what we're seeing is this negative budget, and that is spiraling very, very quickly. And once we're having that monthly bill crisis, the debt crisis is then ensuing. So we're looking at these negative budgets. What can we do? These people are becoming at risk of eviction and debt enforcement practices very quickly. It's very traumatic, particularly with people with young children. But equally in Hart, where we have single parents, of course we do, but we also have families, low-income families who are working really hard they've never been in crisis before, they've never struggled. Suddenly, they're not finding that disposable income anymore to cover all of those bills. And those are the people I think that are afraid to come and ask for advice. They've never had to before. They're living next door to people that seem to be really coping, but they're not. And once we start to see these people, begin to see what debt they're getting into. They're trying to get out of it quickly. They're trying the payday loans. They're trying to get some kind of debt solution, which isn't right for them. And that is really dangerous. And that's where we're seeing the debt problems ensuing. I think from my personal point of view, I think we're on the tip of the iceberg here. The energy crisis, the cost of living crisis is now becoming a debt crisis and a housing crisis for us here. It's not acceptable to ask for help often, and people are finding it really difficult to find those solutions. And as I said, finding the wrong solutions. Mental health crisis is coming along with it. So we're seeing clients on a daily basis. They are contemplating taking their own life. We're dealing with safeguarding issues every single day now. And it's due to unbearable debt, but it's also to do with fear of debt. Some people are coming in and they're so frightened that they're going to get into debt because of what's happening. It's an unprecedented situation for them. Clients are fleeing domestic abuse, and clients are living in homes with mold and disrepair. And we have a lot of those now due to the energy bills and people are not heating their homes. The mold and disrepair is becoming increasingly a big problem for us. And this is happening in Hart. It's happening across the whole of the county, but it's actually happening here too. So we're trying just really, really hard to support clients as best we can. We are really struggling with demand. We've had a 250% increase in phone calls over the last few months, and we are run by volunteers. So we're trying really hard to increase our volunteer capacity, but we're also trying hard to increase our staff so we can pay our staff well to actually train and look after these volunteers who are dealing with mental health. We're like a hidden health service at the moment, trying to deal with actually the mental health impacts of our volunteers and what they're dealing with on a day-to-day basis. So we are working really hard. We have a lot of projects that we're working with on outreach, trying to get out into those communities. We're trying to help people where they are because they can't get to us. Transport is a bit of an issue for us around in our rural areas. And we're training people in device first aid so we can help people in the community. We're supporting clients with cancer and giving energy advice. But we need to do more. We know we need to do more. We need to increase our capacity. We'd like to employ a mental health caseworker, and we need to work on digital exclusion where we know people are really struggling to access benefits and help where they can't. Thank you so much for listening, and I'm grateful for this opportunity to be able to let you know what's going on for us here. Thank you.
I mean, Sam, you say thank you there, but I think, God, it's a thank you from, us and our communities. Without organisations like you, it makes me shudder to think about all those individuals that you've just brought to life through the conversations that you've just spoken to us about. And you think, gosh, what would have happened without an amazing organisation like you being there? So thank you so much for your volunteers, for your staff, for everything that you do, because I think, that was both shocking, inspiring and quite humbling to hear. So huge thank you from us. I'm going to pause then. Again, questions, we'll take those after the final speaker. So I'm going to hand over to Reverend Tracey. So last but definitely not least, would you like to step forward and take the mic?
Yes, hello. As I've been introduced, I'm Tracey. I'm a minister down at a church in central Portsmouth in North End, and we are listed in the kind of deprived wards of Portsmouth and the UK. So in the earlier example, that 90% of people are wealthier than the community that we currently serve. But we do generally have families around a square mile of our church building. So we've been reaching out to them in a number of ways in terms of homelessness and food poverty, and that's what I'd like to talk about tonight. Previously, we ran a food bank, and during the pandemic, in fact 2 years ago this week, we changed over to a pantry, mainly because the stigma of going to a food bank was often too much for people, and we found that we were attracting people from outside of our community rather than the families that lived amongst us and were having difficulty in sharing what they were facing. So by going to a pantry, we really pressed home that what we were doing was helping supermarkets deal with the waste problem that they had. That was where we typically get our food for the pantry, food that supermarkets would ordinarily have thrown away for short life or misprinting on labels, that kind of thing. And in fact, we have managed to save 45 tonnes of food going to landfill in the last 2 years. but we wanted to reduce the stigma for people who needed help. And generally people said to us that the reason they were coming to the pantry when we first opened was around climate issues and food waste. But now 100% of the time that our new people coming to us say it's because they can't afford food and heat and all their other bills. When we first opened, we were dealing with about 40 families a week. We're now dealing with 160 families, which is around 640 people, mouths we feed every week that come through to our pantry. And we only work within the PO2 and PO3 area, so very narrow, limited geographical space. So we've seen this big increase in families that are coming, and the reasons why in which they're coming. They're saying it's the cost of living crisis, it's the bills, and that nobody kind of convinces themselves or kind of pretends that they're coming due to the food waste anymore. We just don't have it. And to give that as an example of the people who are coming through the door, we really feel like reducing stigma has helped people access help, to say they need help. We've done a lot of outreach to schools and places like that where, as we heard in the earlier example, where schools are referring people once they get to know the children. But one particular family, dad is a car mechanic and mum is a teaching assistant. So both got good, reasonable qualifications, both in work. And a year ago, they were managing quite well. They'd had regular holidays, at least once a year. They were paying all their bills and had an element of disposable income for leisure activities. In the past 8 months, they have seen their mortgage almost double, but it's gone up considerably into what they're paying. Their energy bills have tripled, and now they are racking up debt every month. So these are the people that I think have been referred to in the past as just about managing, and now they are increasing their debt every month rather than being able to pay their bills and enjoy extra things for both of them working and managing their family. And they've got 2 children. And so what happened with this particular family is that what happens is the stress is building up, debt's building up, family life is starting to fall apart, and children are starting to not cope. And this became apparent at school. So this is a family who've never, apart from when the children got signed off by the health visitor, they've never been in touch with any form of support services. They've never claimed benefits. They've never had early years intervention or all of that. And now all of a sudden the family are in crisis because of the cost of living and energy crisis. So school have become involved, support work for children and helping the family, utilising services like Citizen Advice Bureau that we have said. And now this family who were functioning very well are now not, and then now using other resources of other teams and other provision from the government, and mum has now been referred to the mental health team. So this is a big impact on how family life is changing considerably because they're making these decisions. Throughout the winter months, we realised that this was an issue, and we regularly had 13 families coming on a Monday night for food and for entertainment. So families didn't have to cook, they didn't have to provide the food, and they didn't have to heat their homes for 3 hours on a Monday evening after school. And as I say, this is in a very small area in Portsmouth. This isn't across the whole area of Portsmouth. This is just within, particularly the PO2 postcode. The other situation I wanted to share with you is about a man who has left the forces. He'd served for over 20 years in the armed forces. He does now suffer from PTSD, but he had managed his mental health in such a way that he was having a single life, doing well, going to work, meeting his bills, and then the increase in rent, increase in energy bills and food costs meant that his PTSD kicked in, which resulted in him losing his job and him now having to access support services and having gone back 5-10 years of where he'd progressed previously. His rent had increased such a month that he kind of then isolated himself so that he, because he couldn't face his landlord and all of those things. Thankfully, a family member brought him along to the pantry and he was able to start and get some food and had access some fruit and vegetables for the first time in over 3 months. The good story there is he's become a volunteer with us, and that's helping him kind of get involved back with the community and stop isolating. but he's still out of work. He's now looking, his landlord is starting to take action against him to evict him from his property, where, you know, as I mentioned before, there's families who are just about managing and how they're coping, but also people who previously have struggled but have managed to get themselves back into work, back into meaningful use of time and a part of the community. Just the rising costs has triggered various things for them, and they've gone backwards, and now again using resources that the government provide to where before they'd completely come off them. But for what he's needed, we signpost now 90% of that people coming into the pantry to start and use other services like citizen advice, HIWCF and other organisations in our community that are around supporting people, whereas previously we may have only signposted between 5 and 10% of people totally using our services. We've seen more and more families come to us, which, as I given the nature of where we are, but we've always generally had single people come and access where they've been on benefits and things like that. But more and more, as in the example I gave earlier about the mechanic and the teaching assistant, we're getting families that are coming through and being referred through children's activities. So like for schools or other groups where people are aware of find out what's going on at home and the reality of it, because the parents aren't used to and don't know how to navigate and access the services that are available out there. We as a pantry have survived because of the Household Support Fund, where we've been able to go and access additional food. Supermarket waste no longer helps us meet the demand that we have. We originally set up to have 100 families a week. As I say, we now regularly have 160 families coming through our doors every week. I think the biggest impact for me to see is, as the stories are being told week in, week out on our volunteers, is we're having to check in with our volunteers on a more regular basis, because the impact of the people who use our services is having a massive impact on our volunteers, and we're having to do regular mental health and wellbeing checks with our volunteers, and that's something in over 20 years of ministry I've never had to do. The demand on other services is rapidly increasing, so we're finding out where people have needed to access when they start to talk to us, and we find out a bit more what's going on in their lives, them trying to access other resources, like even getting a doctor's appointment for a health condition that they may have, and we're seeing the strain on them, which then is increasing on families' mental health when loved ones aren't getting support and medical help in a timely manner. We've noticed the other big shift that we've noticed is that typically we would be dealing with families who are in social housing, council houses, that kind of thing. 75% of our regular pantry members are now in some form of private housing, either have their own mortgage or they are private renting, and most over 80% of our members are in employment and come because they cannot afford to put food and fresh fruit and vegetables on the tables of their homes. So that just gives a little bit of a highlight of what we've seen in the pantry for us here in Portsmouth, and the pressures that are just not food related but are energy related. This week, as our second year birthdays take place, we're offering additional people one extra item in a pantry. They pay £5 and they can take 10 items. We're offering them an additional one this week, which has been lapped up. We introduced a system about 4 weeks ago because we had some of our members complaining that they thought people were shoplifting from our pantry. And I have to say, it took me a while to get my head around that. And so we introduced a system where there was extra checks done of people to take. So there's people around them, they're helping them, they're assisting them with food that they might take and taking wise choices. But then after they were walking out of the door, they were taking some extra fun. And we found that nearly 15% of people using our pantry were actually taking extra items because they were worried about how they would feed their families. So we're looking at ways in which we can do to kind of change some people's behaviour and to put more notices up, increase our volunteers to let people know that there's support and help there. every day this week there is energy suppliers, there are water companies there that are giving advice and support on the help that is available. In the past, we've done these as an information day, and we've had, you know, maybe about 20% engagement with these types of days. We're the second day of running this week, and over 85% of our customers have engaged with our extra people, the energy companies and housing companies that are housing associations that are in the room to offer some support and help. And this has just kind of blown us all away, the amount of help and support that people are needing, when a year ago they just would never have been on the horizon of any support agency. And I think that's the biggest kind of shock to us in what we're doing here in Portsmouth. So I hope that's been interesting from our little patch here.
I mean, Tracey, that was just phenomenal. And again, you know, thank you doesn't seem like a word that in any way, shape or form is strong enough to impart the, you know, the amount of time, effort and support you and your volunteers and everyone involved give to your community. And, you know, a huge thank you on behalf of all of us for everything that you do. And I think what was really interesting for me and what you just spoke about was that sense of shining a light on this new group, those that were managing just about before, but actually they're now in crisis, they're now going into debt, they're really struggling, and then the knock-on effect on mental health, on family breakdown, on drug and alcohol abuse, all of those different things that we know that comes with that, and then the implications for the family, the children, those individuals involved. You know, it was really interesting to hear that. So thank you so much for shining that light. And I think, you know, I can say on behalf of everybody listening, you know, all three of you have given us slices there of some really shocking examples of actually our communities and the situations and circumstances individuals find themselves in. And I think it was a quote from you, Rachel, where you said it's a damning incitement on society that people live in crisis in these days. And I think, you know, that really resonates with what all of you have said. And I think, you know, there's such a theme coming from all of you about stigma, about new groups of people, about pressures on services, around mental health, around volunteer capacity and actually their well-being and mental health, around the innovation, you know, amazing kind of ideas and creativity that all of you are putting into your services to really meet this changing demand, this increasing demand.